Welcome everybody to MACFEST 2024. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you're sitting in the world. Assalamu alaikum. We're saying hello from France, from the UK, and from all over the world. And just before tomorrow, we're also going to say Happy Eid. So welcome everybody to MACFEST 2024. Before we start today, I just would like to remind our Muslim friends, artists, that we've got Arts Awards process open at the moment. The deadline is 30th of June. Please submit your artworks through MACFEST website. The entries are free. And we've got 4 categories: drawing, painting, photography, and calligraphy. Or if you know anybody, if you do have Muslim artist friends, please pass the message on. We would like to see your works. So today we've got a very exciting event. It's part of our Words and Books Festival. If you have any questions or would like to share any thoughts, please put them either in the chat or in the Q&A portal. We will pick them up and we will address them probably at the end of the event today. Also, thank you so much for all your donations. We heavily rely on them. We are preparing MACFEST 2025 at the moment, so we really appreciate your support. Because that helps us create all these wonderful events for you. Most of them are free. Please take a look at Eventbrite. We still have a good few events to go before we finish this year. Stay connected with us via newsletter and on social media. MACFEST is on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and TikTok. So please use our hashtag #SpreadHoneyNotHate and MACFEST 2024. And today's host is Simon Guerrier, a writer and a producer. He's going to be talking with Sefi Atta. His most recent books are the biography of David Whittaker in an exciting adventure with television and the Doctor Who encyclopedia Utopia. Simon's original science fiction series Graceless was broadcasted on BBC Radio, as were his episodes of Blake 7 and Dunder. And with Samira Ahmed, he's made a number of radio documentaries on subjects ranging from Mary Whitehouse to the atomic bomb. Simon is currently chair of the Books Committee of the Writers Guild of Great Britain. So welcome everybody once again, and over to you, Simon.
Thank you so much. Hello, everybody. My name is Simon, and I'm delighted to be talking to Sefi Atta today. For those who don't know, Sefi was born in Lagos, Nigeria, and now lives in Meridian, Mississippi, and she is an acclaimed and extraordinarily prolific author. Her first novel, Everything Good Will Come, was published in 2005 and was followed by Swallow in 2010, A Bit of Difference in 2013, which is what we're going to be talking about today, and then The Bead Collector in 2019 and The Bad Immigrant in 2021. She's the author of a short story collection, News from Home, a children's book, Drama Queen, and also Sefi Atta, The Selected Plays. Then there are her short stories, her radio plays, and her stage plays. Her awards include the Wole Soyinka Prize for Literature in Africa. I hope I've said that right. And the Noma Award for Publishing in Africa. Her other credits include co-writing the Netflix original movie based on her novel Swallow. She has been a juror on the Neustadt International Prize for Literature and a judge on the Caine Prize for African Writing. In 2015, a critical study of her novels and short stories, Writing Contemporary Nigeria, How Sefi Atta Illuminates African Culture and Tradition, was published by Cambria Press. She has been a writer in residence at the University of Southern Mississippi and at Northwestern University. We are going to focus on A Bit of Difference, this book. And I thought, first of all, Sefi, for those here who haven't read the book, what do they need to do? What do they need to know? What can you give us a taste of the novel? Oh, you are muted.
Okay, here we are.
That's better.
Can everyone hear me? Good morning, and thanks to everyone who's here. Simon, thank you. The novel was written 10 years ago now, but it's a contemporary story about a Nigerian woman. It begins with a description of a typical image of an African woman in a charity poster. And then it goes into a description of my main character, Diola, who has just arrived at an airport and sees the poster, and she has her thoughts on it. And from then on, the novel is a profile on her. She's 39. She is single. She doesn't have children. She works for an international charity in London. She goes to Nigeria for work and meets a single man there. They have a one-night stand, and things get complicated. So that's the story, but it's about her daily struggles with being a citizen of Britain and Nigeria. It's about her struggles with transnationality and cultural conflicts. You know, she's in an odd position because she comes from a fairly elite community in Lagos, and in England, in London, where she lives, she is part of a minority community. And much as she finds her community back home conservative and stifling, she's also not fully at ease with the liberal circles in which she finds herself in England. And her dilemma is how she's perceived and judged based on other people's expectations of what she's supposed to be. Now, what's different about the novel in the context of African literature is that we're not used to reading about an African woman's anger. You know, we're more used to reading about stories that appeal to readers' sense of sympathy. And Diola does not want sympathy; she wants respect. And also, we're used to reading about Africans who leave their countries to come overseas to find freedom, or expats who go to Africa to find themselves. And this story is one about an African woman who came to England to find herself and returns home to find freedom.
So, given that it begins with this image of an African woman, and then you get the real African woman, was the idea to kind of challenge or to overturn cliches and stereotypes? Was that
absolutely from the get-go? But I wasn't too conscious of that. You know, the first line came to me: "The great ones capture you," and it represents her anxiety. You know, the anxiety she has based on other people's expectations of how they want her to behave. You know, and so I juxtapose her and the poster to show this image that people are used to, and this young woman who most people are not even aware of.
okay?
Oh, did you want me to continue with that?
Yeah, no, I'm interested. Yes, please.
Well, you know, I was going to say that I started writing because I never read a novel about a Nigerian woman like myself. You know, I was 30 years old and I've never read a novel about a Nigerian woman like myself. So my main thing was to tell a story about my Nigerian experience, you know, in this novel. And yeah.
Wow. I thought what was also interesting is that there's a lot of ways that this story could go. I mean, there's the politics of the charity that she works for, and she's working as an auditor, checking the accounts of various charitable organizations around the world. And there's a threat that not all that's going on there is as it should be. And then there's a constant threat when she's in Nigeria. We keep being told about armed robbers. So I was sort of braced for some kind of, is there going to be an action sequence here? But actually, there's a bit in the book where you say, you kind of play against that. You say that a lot of Africa, it's a bit where Diola says African novels are too exotic, and reading them,
Yeah.
feels they're meant for Western readers who are more likely to be impressed. And that the more death, the better in these novels. It's like literary genocide. And as the conversation goes on, she's saying that people don't want to hear from the like, or her friend the novelist said people don't want to hear from the likes of me writing about trivialities like love.
Goodness, I cannot remember writing that, and I have not read the novel recently. But it's a good thing I made those points. There was an expectation at the time I was writing the novel that African novels were meant to be exotic or extraordinary or calamitous or I was pushing back against all those expectations in the novel. And in a way, it was necessary to make a case for ordinary moments, which was my main objective. Because as much as we're used to reading about human rights abuses and post-colonial trauma and stories with political and social commentary, I feel that the ordinary stories about everyday conflicts to do with relationships, family, friendships, unite us rather than divide us into foreign object and spectator.
Mhm.
You know, I find it interesting that you picked up on the armed robbery, despite everything else I'd written about the ordinary stories. And these are the challenges that I had at the time. I think that has changed now, but I was pushing back against those expectations. Oddly enough, I was doing exactly what Diola was doing in the story. But I don't remember those lines because I haven't read it in a while. In fact, I stopped reading it the moment it was published.
Yeah, I just thought it was interesting because I mean the arm robbers. Don't get me wrong; it's mentioned 2 or 3 times, but I just thought maybe this is where that's going. That you're setting up the context of this, and then actually there's this point about it's about halfway through the book, which is that they say no, the love story is enough. That love is not trivial, love is epic. Is the line that's used to end that. And
I wrote that. I can't remember at all. At all. For me, it was very simple. I write about the old boomers in Nigeria. I call them the old boomers in this novel. But we were people who were born on Lagos Island in the 1960s, and we came of age in the 1970s. And I call us old boomers because our parents benefited from the old boom in Nigeria, and so did we. We're born into an independent Nigeria. Our childhood was marked by a civil war, the Biafran War, and our adolescence by military coups. There was armed robbery going on, and we graduated into a recession and structural adjustment program. Some of us went overseas, some of us chose to go overseas, as I did, others stayed at home. But we also had a great time, and I wanted to represent that in the novel, that despite all the difficulties, that we had a great time. And so part of that, hopefully I was able to capture part of that in the novel as well, and rather than, I wouldn't call them negative stories as such, and they're not. Every country is going through something right now, so they're not specific to Nigeria or to African countries. But I also feel that with people like Diola, even though they've lived through political crisis, what changes them, what directly impacts them are the personal stories. And I hope that came out in the novel. There wasn't going to be any armed robberies. I wasn't going to put her through some calamitous situation to get through. And I was going to take my time with it. It was a risk I took with this novel, expecting that people would pay attention to what she was going through in her ordinary life was a risk to take, because people, it's almost as though they would expect more in an African novel, and I just wasn't ready to give that to anyone, not in this novel. I'd done that in Everything Good Will Come, my first novel, and it was necessary for me to do that. While I think these stories are important and I continue to tell them, I think the ordinary stories are just as important. I love to read stories like that set in other countries, and there's no reason why I couldn't do that in Nigeria.
So did a bit of difference grow out of? I mean, where do you see it? I felt that a bit of difference kind of had similar themes and ideas in the ways that you'd explore them in your previous novel, Everything Good Will Come. I could see how you would step from one to the other, and they definitely felt books by the same author, if that makes
right. Step one was written in first person, and the other was written in third person. And Everything Good Will Come was my first novel, and people always assume it's my story. It wasn't, because I wrote it in first person. And it was set in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And there was a reason for having political commentary in those books, for the reasons that I've shared them with you already. The aftermath of the Civil War, that cycle of elections and military coups. But in a bit of difference, I didn't want to do that anymore. I wanted to do something new. That set in the noughties, as you say in England, early 2000s, after Nigeria's return to democracy. And I didn't want to burden the story with political commentary. But it's definitely an old boomer story, and it definitely brings it up to date.
Mm-hmm. And what's going on in the background in A Bit of Difference is the Iraq War. I mean, it's
in England.
So the kind
when she's in England.
The conflict that's going on is a Western. That's the kind of background that's going on. So, is it? I mean, again, the sense is that it's background rather than what you're foregrounding is the personal, but this is all running on in the background.
It's exactly the same when I was in England, and that was to show that regardless of what is happening in the world, she has her own difficulties that she has to get through. And I'm sure, there were armed robberies happening in England as well, but they didn't directly impact her.
Yeah, I think it's more that you wouldn't, that's not a conversation that comes up as you book a taxi or are thinking about driving down.
No.
But that means that the book was published in 2013, but it's set a decade before that.
Yeah.
So what informed that choice?
Well, I drafted it many years before. I probably drafted it at that time, and it takes me quite a while to revise books. So I'm working on different books at the same time. And forgive me if I don't remember details about it, because I'm working on 2 others right now. But I'm glad I covered that period in the lives of all boomers, as I've done from the 70s to the 80s to 90s, early 2000s, and now I'm working on the 2020s. We are missing from Nigerian literature, and I know that there's so many books coming out of Nigeria, but we were the one generation that didn't produce writers, because we had to have sensible careers, and our perspective is different, and hopefully that comes out in the novel. I find that novels written by, for instance, Gen X's, Gen Z's, millennials are very different from us. We had different experiences to them, and hopefully if people can see and compare, they'll realize. But most of the time, I find that readers can't tell the difference, in the way in which Deola's voice would tell a story, and a younger character would tell a story. And this is something that I think is very specific to, at least I found with Nigerian literature. You would never expect a writer like yourself, for instance, to sound like a writer who is in their 30s. You see? So, and people will be able to tell the difference based on your voice, based on what you're writing about. I find with Nigerian literature, we're all lumped together. You know, and it takes someone who has had my experience to figure out that it's different. Our voices are different.
And is that to do with the volume of material, or is that, if there were more Nigerian authors, would we have a more sort of granular sense of that, or is it
There are
just
many Nigerian writers, and we're writing from all over the world. I just think that publishing has a hard time distinguishing between us, you know, and they look for certain elements in our stories, and I honestly, I don't know. I just know that I would like to represent my own generation, and I'm glad I'm doing so in my novels.
So you talked about the lack of writers of your generation because of having to get what my what my dad would refer to as a proper job.
Exactly.
And you qualified as an accountant.
Yeah,
Now,
I do.
your protagonist in this story is an auditor, scrutinizing the accounts of charities. And the story seems to be set in the places that you know as well, personally. So I wondered, how much does the story spring from your experience, and how much, as you were writing it, did you have to research bits? Was it already there in your head and your experience?
I certainly write what I know. I've always done in all my novels. But I do a lot of research and try and make it look seamless. And I use my imagination. You know, that counts too. Again, I think a lot of writing coming out of Nigeria is assumed that it's autobiographical, and it's not necessarily the case. I can't be all these characters I've created, from the drug smuggler in Swallow to Dela, who's an accountant. You know, I certainly set the story in places I'd been, places I was familiar with, like Lagos and Abuja and London and Atlanta. And sometimes, because I'd not lived in an area a neighborhood for a while, I'd go there. I remember having to go to Wilson Green by tube just to understand Deola's journey. I'd lived there for a while, maybe 2 years before, but I couldn't remember it. It had been a while since I'd been there. So I took a tube, I went there, looked around the stores, the shops. Sorry, America has got to me. And actually visited a house that looked like one, you know, that she might have lived in, went to the library and other areas. So that's the kind of research I do, but we're very different. Dela and I are very different. I don't even know if she's older than me or I'm older than her, I can't remember now. But I was married at the age of 28. I left, that was in 1992. I left for America in 1994. And I was a mom by the age of 30. I'd never worked for an international charity. I had to research that as well, how they work. I listened to people who had worked in those organizations. You know, that's the kind of research I do. Mm-hmm. And yeah, we were very different. I would never have made the same choices that she made in this novel, for instance. So that was my imagination. I don't have any friends like Bandele or Shubu or Tessa. I've met people like that, but I don't have close friends like that. So all those scenes were scenes that I imagined. What we have in common is our frustrations with the states that Nigeria and Africa in general are in, you know, and yeah, sometimes she has hope, and other times she fears that nothing will change. You know, she doubts that charities will make a difference. She thinks that they create a culture of dependency. I remember her making those kind of comments, and she acknowledges Nigeria and Africa's self-sabotage, in the sense that We have bad leaders, corrupt governments, ethnic and religious distrust, but she also recognizes that other countries have played a part in undermining and exploiting Nigeria and Africa through colonialism and neo-colonialism. And yeah, so so that's what we have in common. And because of that connection, I was able to tell her story. But we're very different people. We don't have the same bios. We don't have the same histories. We don't have the same instincts.
So where does her character come from? Is it an amalgamation of things, or is it something that you observed, or is it somebody you know?
No, absolutely not. And it's not even an amalgamation of anyone that I know. It began with a voice. It was the first time I'd used my authorial voice. I don't know if I've mentioned that. And then I just followed her around closely. I had a lot to say personally in this novel, but I didn't want to take over from her. I had to follow her around and follow her around in an honest way with this character that I'd created. And through her, I was able to express some things. I didn't necessarily agree with everything she said. Mm-hmm. Where do characters come from? I don't know. I have no idea. And it would be impossible for me to explain and probably boring to listen to. Mm-hmm. But I have images in my mind of what they look like. They don't look like me. She was much taller and in my mind. And yeah, I cannot imagine writing a story and putting myself at the center. It would be so boring, So I do have to create characters who do different things that I would never do. Yeah.
And so is that about challenging your ideas and assumptions? Is that what a character like that enables you to do?
For me, telling stories is always about having a great debate with myself. Okay. So I don't necessarily create characters who would agree with me on everything. I create characters who are difficult, who want to have their own say, and in the same way that Eniton in Everything Good was, I allow them to wander, But it also depends on what the story I want to tell. In A Bit of Difference, I was not interested in making any political commentary. So I limited that. With Eniton, I wanted to make political commentary. So I put her in situations that I could do so.
Okay. And you talked about the thing that made her character was that you heard her voice.
Yeah.
The book is, I was trying to sum it up to my wife. It's the tone of it is it's quite warm, it's quite funny, it's very personal, but there are these threats and this sense of the world being quite a difficult place through which she has to navigate. So I wonder, does the voice of your main character dictate the tone of the book?
Absolutely. I think tone always comes from voice, and mine is ironical, and can be satirical sometimes. Obviously, the tone, when you develop tone, it takes years for me. I'm talking about 4 years to get it right. And God, it'll be hard to explain. Hard to explain. I don't like talking about process.
Okay.
And sometimes think it might be very boring to listeners.
I find that fascinating, but right, we'll move on.
Oh, really? You find process fascinating?
I do, yeah, because I struggle.
Too?
I struggle with process, and I've been doing this a long time, and I still don't really understand what it is.
Oh, I don't either. And that's why it's hard for me to explain. I think it's like practicing scales if you're a pianist. You just let there's certain technical things, and then you just let the magic happen, and revision gives you a long time to reconsider what you've written. And I've revised until I'm not as embarrassed as I was the first time, and I'm ready to let go. But that revision process never stops. And that's why it's very hard for me to reread my work. I don't know if you find the same thing. Like, very difficult.
Continually correct it.
Yeah, always. And why did I structure the book this way? What the hell was I thinking when I wrote that? You constantly have those questions, you know.
Yeah, yeah. So one of the things that is really fun about this book is that there's an awful lot of characters who say exactly what they think with very little, which means that there's quite a lot of waspish comments about different cultures, different characters, what Nigerian men might be like, what Nigerian women might be like, what British people are like. How did that go down? What was the reaction to the book? And what I really wanted to know was, does this book get a different reaction depending who reads it and where they're from?
Yeah, you're right about my characters being talkative. And I gave her friends like that for a reason, so that she can bounce ideas off them and readers can see the progression. You know, there's Bandele, who's a Nigerian writer who has very little connection to the culture. You know, he thinks, well, he denies that racism even exists, I think, in the novel. And he thinks talking about racism is a little imperdic. And then there's Shibu, who is the investment banker and the born-again Christian, and she's quite good at, she's better able to navigate the business world, you know. And I think that's because she belongs to a Pentecostal church where they encourage enterprise. Yeah, it's true. And I've met characters like her. Who else? Tessa, who is a bit of a lovey, you know. And she's an odd character because she and Deola went to the same boarding school. She was a drama school kid who had a scholarship, and she was a little bit embarrassed about her background. I've met women like Tessa, and she sees Deola as Nigerian rather than black, you know. But the response to the novel, I haven't followed it, to be honest with you. A lot of my novels go under the radar, which is quite fine with me. And I would say that that the novel will elicit the same type of response that Deola would. You know, if people in Nigeria have had the same background as her, they might relate to her. If they haven't, they might find her self-absorbed and privileged. I felt at the time when I wrote it that readers overseas might find her surprising. Now we read a lot of books about women like Deola, but back then we didn't have as many, you know. But I wrote about her because she exists. I wrote about her without justifying her existence, you know, and that was important to me. Always, I found it quite funny at the time. There was a lot of discussion about the African cosmopolitan experience as though it was something new or sensational. And it really wasn't. Africans have had that experience for generations. They may not be the norm, but they do exist. So I found that quite amusing that people were having those discussions at the time.
Okay. So we've talked about wanting to address the kind of cliches and stereotypes of the way that Nigerian and African experiences are portrayed in other books and in other writing. And this obviously has been the subject of the Cambria Press book, Writing Contemporary Nigeria, How Sefi Atta Illuminates African Culture and Tradition. Have you read that book?
No. And I'm very grateful for the book and to the academics who contributed to it and to the editor, Walter Collins, but I've never even opened it up. And mind you, it says how, it doesn't say if I do it well. But there's too much pressure. for me to, at least for a writer like me, I don't know, some people might find it easier. And whether the reviews are good or bad, whether the critiques are good or bad, I'd rather not read them. I did initially with my first novel. And then I realized it wasn't a good thing for me. I can actually post a review on my Facebook page without reading it. I have read one or two when people send them to me and tell me it's good, but I'm not in the habit of doing that.
I wondered whether even just that book existing, does it kind of skew what you write next or what you think about?
No, because I never read it. I never read it.
But yeah, okay. Yeah,
I have read one or two reviews before, don't get me wrong, and one was particularly useful. It spoke about my orientation with my first novel, and I learned an awful lot from it. But it was a kind review, and it was constructive.
Yeah.
And if anything, I thought that was the most important lesson I learned from a review. And I write about life. I can't get into conversations with academics who read my work. I write about people who don't even read books.
Yeah.
So
you said about this review that talked to you about your orientation. In what way? What did you learn from that?
Oh, for whom do you write? It's a question that most African writers have to deal with. Mind you, I've met English writers in America who also have to deal with that. I remember having a conversation with someone who was talking about why I started off the conversation by asking him, do you find it annoying when you write boot and they want to change it to Trump in America? And he was adamant about it, and he was so mad, and he said, if anyone ever tried that with me, I would never accept it. And these are things that I have to deal with all the time. In my latest novel, an editor took a look at it, and for instance, where I talked about secondary school, he suggested changing it to high school, a term we would never use in Nigeria, or I talked about a crash, and he talked about daycare, and I said, no, I'm not going to change it. Or change petrol to gas, and so I think it's something that English writers who are published in America have to deal with as well. But obviously, I didn't know that till I had that conversation with this writer. But there's a lot of consideration when you're writing a novel, at least when I was writing my first, for readers who might not understand what you're writing about. But I no longer have that concern when I'm writing.
Yeah, I've had some experience of that, but it's not just word choices; it's things like whether you italicize unfamiliar words.
Yeah, I've taken all my words out of italics now.
Yeah,
and I think the culture changes. At least it has between the time I started writing 27 years ago and now. And not putting words in italics is fairly common now. The other day I was asked if I wanted to have a glossary, and I said no one does that anymore. No one does that anymore. If this reader happens to not understand my Nigerian idioms or references, you can Google it. You know. So, and it also depends on the story I'm telling and what I hope to achieve. In this particular work, it was such a work of resistance that I was just not going to do it. But if I was telling a children's story, I might have a different approach.
Well, that's interesting, because the next book that you wrote after A Bit of Difference, or the next book that was published, was Drama Queen, which was aimed at children.
Right.
So was that a sort of conscious shift? I'm going to do something different, or did it?
No. I drafted 3 novels years ago, and then I was working on them. And I think the last one was The Bad Immigrant. And A Bit of Difference was the second, and I'd finished The Bad Immigrant, and I was exhausted. I didn't want to write anymore. I wanted to just do other things and get out of the room. But an old friend of mine who was a publisher saw me in Lagos at a gathering and asked if I had a story for her to publish. And the story of Drama Queen had been on my mind for years. I thought about it overnight. At first I told her no, and then I thought about it overnight. I can't resist the temptation to tell a story. I'm a recovering addict, as you see me. You know, if anyone gives me an opportunity to tell a story, I will. But that's because I live in a small city in Mississippi. Give you a little view of my environment. Trees. Oh, you probably can't see anything but brick. But anyway, it's quiet. And for a while, I was frustrated because I wanted to have a regular job rather than hang around in my sweatpants and sweatsuits all day long writing. Anyway, so I can't resist the temptation to tell a story. And the story had been on my mind. It's a story, it's autobiographical. It's set in Lagos of the early 70s, 1974, I believe. I attended an all-girls boarding school in Lagos from 1974 to 78. I was between 10 and 14, which are very formative years. You know, mind you, all years are formative. And at this school, Queen's College, I was a designated playwright in class. And I took my role very seriously. I would write the plays and cast them and, you know, do all the things that I began to do as a playwright later on in life. You know, most Saturdays, if we didn't have exams or people couldn't be bothered, classes would take turns to entertain the school on Saturday evenings if we had electricity. If there was a power cut, forget it. Everything was over. So whenever it was our class's turn, I would team up with a couple of other girls, one of them, Ituembasi, who later went on to study theatre arts and became an international fashion designer. And another young, we weren't young women, we were girls, Tony Olushola, whose mother was an actress, Nigerian actress, in a soap opera titled Village Headmaster. So a lot of my plays were inspired by Village Headmaster, which was set in a village with a king, and I would always cast myself as a king. And then I would go from dormitory to dormitory with handwritten notices about, it was very Shakespearean, I have to say. It was rough and ready drama. And, you know, going around and saying, hear thee, or hear ye, we're going to have we're going to have a play this weekend. We'd announce it in a dining room, and then we put on the play. And it was just so much fun. And we also had to deal with the normal things like bullying and not being considered one of the pretty girls or one of the popular girls. And that came to the novel. And I gave it to her. I promised her I was going to deliver. I delivered. She published it. I never had it published overseas. My publisher was interested in it, but I said it wouldn't travel well in America, that people wouldn't understand the slang I was using, which was another great thing about Queen's College. We created our own language.
Yeah.
And I found that even the young students who the book was for, couldn't understand some of the slang I'd used. They were not kids who they would probably be reading Harry Potter, kids like that, and Lemon Stickers, rather than some historical novel about a kid their age. They'd grown up with the internet. They didn't understand this business about writing letters. They didn't understand what it was like to use a rotary phone. You know, that was new, discovering what Gen Z Nigerians were like.
Yeah. But Harry Potter and Lemony Snicket are full of words that children don't understand.
That's true. But oddly enough, although I haven't read any of them, to be honest with you. My daughter did. I don't know. I think, well, hopefully, maybe it was just my initial observation, and maybe that will change eventually. But I feel that the kind of students I was dealing with were students who were in private schools in Nigeria. They would be able to afford the book, they would be able to read it, and they've just been westernized through the internet, you know. Mind you, I did get a lot of good feedback from them, even though they were confused about this story when it was set. And they were more interested in the bullying and things that they could relate to. Again, the ordinary stories.
Yeah. Interesting. I'm aware that time is pressing on, so I'm just going to remind people who are watching this that they can ask questions via the chat and via the Q&A if they wish to. As well as the novels you've written, you're an accomplished playwright on radio and on stage, and you adapted or co-adapted your second novel, Swallow, for Netflix. And I was interested in how straightforward that was to do, and did it give you a new perspective on what that novel is and how it works? Could you talk to me about that? Could you explain to me what was involved in that adaptation?
Right. Well, you started off by saying I was an accomplished playwright, and like you, I can't figure most of it out. I'm just going along with the flow and trying to figure out how to do things well, you know. And it's the same with writing plays, even though I've written quite a few of them. The process, I've been writing screenplays for a while on a client, and I've had some success with them in contests like the Zoetrope screenplay contest that's run by Francis Ford Coppola's Zoetrope All Story. And that gave me confidence. That's all you need to keep carrying on, confidence, right? And when Kunle Afolayan, the producer and director of the film, approached me, of course I was very excited, but I thought, can I do it? You know, even though I'd written screenplays before, it doesn't mean that you can do it again. You're as good as your last one. So I had to reread the novel, which was painful. Again, I was revising it as I read it. And then I worked with him. We decided what to leave in and what to keep. Luckily, I write with a lot of dialogue. I enjoy writing dialogue, so we were able to use a lot of it in the screenplay. And when it was done, I handed it over to him to do the editing. We wrote for about 2.5 hours worth of film, but it was a 2-hour film, and he did the editing. So not every line or every scene in the film is mine. Some of it was surprising. There was ad-libbing, and by the way, I'm used to that as a playwright in Nigeria. Regardless of what you write, actors would get on stage and say say what they want to say. Directors would insert jokes you would never make. So I've been surprised by some of my stage productions, as I was with film. But in film, it's quite normal for that to happen, regardless of what you've written. The end product is not necessarily yours. Even the opening scene in Swallow the movie wasn't something I had worked on. It was new to me, which was quite surprising. It was such an enjoyable collaboration, and it taught me a lot.
So does that mean that Swallow the novel feels like yours, but Swallow the Netflix adaptation feels less like yours? Do you have a kind of proprietorial feeling about these things?
Absolutely not. I don't have any sense of ownership over the script. I knew from get-go that, you know, when you're writing a new form, you read up a lot about it, you listen to people who talk about it, you read interviews about it, and so I knew what to expect. It wasn't my film, it was his, you know, and I was glad I was able to contribute to it. So, you know, and even with plays, I had to give up, as I told you. because you'd be sitting on stage, you say, I never wrote that. I'm sorry, you'd be sitting in the audience and you think, I never wrote that. What's going on, you know? So Nigeria had trained me to be prepared for my life to be changed. And I expected it because that's the way in which screenplays are treated.
Excellent, excellent. You talked about working on multiple things at once.
Yes.
So what can you tell us about what you are working on at the moment, and what will we see next?
Right. And for those who are listening, it's now, what time is it now here? I don't know. It's early in the morning, so I'm exhausted. I don't wake up till much later. And I mean, brain-wise, I don't wake up till much later. I'm working on, well, they're forthcoming. I've pretty much finished them, books 9 and 10. And they're forthcoming in autumn and spring, or fall, as Americans say, and spring. Book 9 is set in 2017 to 2018 in Nigeria and America, mostly in Mississippi and New York. And it's a story about a Nigerian teen who gets caught up in a controversial case about modern day slavery in Mississippi. She comes over to work as a nanny and finds herself in difficult circumstances. And it was inspired by a short story I published in 2003 titled A Union on Independence Day. I later changed the title to News from Home. And that was about an undocumented worker as well who came to the US to work as a nanny. I always thought it'd be fun to set the story in Mississippi because of its history of slavery. And she works for a Nigerian family, by the way, under these circumstances. And the story came about during the COVID lockdown. I was walking around our neighborhood quite a lot with my family during that time. I have discussions, political and otherwise. And my imagination would just go, you know, on these walks, and I began to imagine the characters and the story around it. It's pretty much set in my neighborhood, you know, although, again, I'm not writing about myself. Never hired anyone to be a nanny. Book 10 is a collection of shorts and a novella set in 2020. The novella is most of the book. And it's a return to my characters in Everything Good. And my main character, Eniton, is 60 now, and she's taking stock of her life, which is what I've been doing since I turned 60. So I have a lot of things to say again in the novel. I'm writing in the third person again. And it was such a difficult book to write. Such a sad book for me to write. I was miserable when I was drafting it because she didn't let up. You know, this, as I was following her, she noticed everything, every single thing. And I just wish she would let things go, and she wouldn't, you know. But, you know, then the joy came when I was revising it, and everything she'd noticed in the novel came to pass. So I started enjoying it at the revision stage. Again, a very ironical voice, you know, and somewhat satirical voice. That will be out in the spring. So that's what's forthcoming. Yeah.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wonder if returning to the characters of A Bit of Difference would be a more enjoyable experience. That if you caught us up on where they are now, that might be more fun to write. Usually
when I leave characters, I leave them for good in a novel. I'm really sick and tired of them. I am. And I was with A Bit of Difference. I was with Everything Good. I never thought I'd come back to those characters. But it was a novella, and I just didn't feel like creating new characters. So I thought, let me do this. It's a moment, you know, let me come back full circle to these characters. What a mistake. I had to look, I didn't even read the book. I just had to peek at certain sections. That was a debut novel, so you can imagine how difficult that was for me. And then to remember what happened to them and when, to make sure that the novella. So I didn't have characters who were okay, what happened? How come she's 70 now? I had to make sure those things worked. But yeah, if anyone expected to be, because everything good was written in the first person, and it has a certain innocence and heartfelt tone. This novella doesn't. It really doesn't. It's very dark, and yeah.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
I'm just having a quick look through in the chat. I don't think we have any questions.
That's okay.
I'm going to have a look in the Q&A, but I think we've been fairly comprehensive in what we've covered. So
I hope so.
I think this is a sign of how well I've asked the questions that I've
Yes.
asked.
Yes. I
indeed.
need someone to bounce to set me off, because honestly, as I said, I don't remember much about the novel, and I don't even remember how I felt when I wrote it.
Oh, I think you're in a good mood. I really enjoyed it. It's a really fun, lively, and really acutely observed novel. And
Yeah.
I was going to read it anyway for this, and then I got to the end and I started it again, which I don't often
Oh,
do.
that's wonderful. That's wonderful.
I recommend it to everybody watching. And I can see that Qaisra is ready to.
No. Well, if nobody else got a question, I can ask one question. A couple, in fact, Sefi.
Yeah.
One was relating to your wonderful, wonderful writing careers. You've done so much. Starting at your writing career to what it's like now, what's been the main difference? I mean, I know there are different journeys, different times, different commitments. What's a striking difference to what you were like in those early days as a writer?
In the early days.
What you are now? We had a
sorry.
conversation like this relating to social media, for example.
Well, what has changed is that we have so many Nigerian writers now, and I love that. And telling different stories. So there's less pressure on us as individuals to carry the weight of a Nigerian story or an African story, as they were called in those days. No one even differentiated between the countries when I started writing. I remember dealing with an agent who asked one of her partners, he spoke to one of her partners about me, and he said, "Oh, where is Lagos? I've never been. I'm well." She said he was well traveled, but he didn't have any idea where Lagos was. Those are the kind of issues I had to deal with, or telling a story and people thinking it's you're writing about yourself. So, for instance, if I created a story like The Mother and Everything to Become, and they would ask me questions about my mom, whether she was a religious fanatic. And as I told you before we started recording, that my mom is an Anglican. She has a strong faith, but we don't talk about religion in my family. We just don't. I don't remember my father talking about religion. My father is Muslim, came from a Muslim family. I honestly don't even know if he was a practicing Muslim, because he died when I was 18 years old. So anyway, you'd have questions that I felt were intrusive. People would assume that you were writing about yourself. I remember Ento had quite a few miscarriages, and people in Nigeria, for instance, people overseas will ask questions about my parents. People in Nigeria would ask me if I'd had miscarriages before. I use my imagination. Do I have to have experienced one? So those are the types of things that have changed. I have not kept up with technology. I really haven't. My family had to beg me to change my phone from one of those flip phones to an iPhone. And then I always take someone else's phone when they're done with theirs, and then I never update my software. As I said before we started this, I had to do an update. I have been blissfully aware of anything that has happened with technology. Mind you, I have a Facebook page. Although my daughter tells me it's old-fashioned and only moms and dads are on Facebook anyway, I tried to have a Twitter account, and I hired someone to post for me, and I wasn't happy with the way it was going. I didn't even check for a month, and then when I did, I was embarrassed because I would never have posted. So I deleted most of the posts and left a few. And I don't understand it. Who am I speaking to on Twitter? And people have been trying to get me to go on Instagram, and I'm like, nah, I don't even like taking photos. So forget that. I've stopped doing Facebook for a while. So I live in a very quiet life, and it enables me to write as much as I do. I'm not. People say I'm prolific. I really am not. I just have to find something to do with my time. And what else? What else has changed? My relationship with the literary marketplace has certainly changed. Initially, I didn't know what was going on. You know, I came into this as an accountant, and so I came from the business world. But the one thing I decided before I started writing was that I wouldn't care about the business world, and that may have harmed me as a working writer who wrote full time. But I couldn't care less. I made a decision, and so initially I was shocked because I didn't make good business decisions, and then what did I expect? The outcome would be. But now, the joy of being able to do this for 27 years is just incredible. So when people say to me, oh, and I'm constantly having people say things like, oh, well, you need to promote yourself more. I keep hearing, oh, words to the effect that I'm not valued. And honestly, I think who could care less? I couldn't. I enjoy what I'm doing. And I meet writers who would love to be in this position where they could write full time.
Yes.
That to me is a full cup, not even half. And I don't think people understand that it's something. I didn't understand it initially. I thought it was weird because I'm used to getting up and going to work. But the moment I realized I'm in this position in Mississippi, people don't leave their positions in universities easily where I live. And so I had to come to terms with that. And the minute I did, I realized that it was such a blessing to be able to do this full time and to be able to do it without worrying about my next paycheck, my next this or that. It's been incredible. I'm so grateful for that opportunity. So that's the change I've been through.
Thank you so much, Sefi. That was wonderful. No, you're very lucky indeed. You have had the luxury, the pleasure of devoting yourself entirely to your writing and saying no to everything else, saying no social media, I don't need it. Well done. I do have another question, but I can see there's a question by one of our colleagues. Laljita, shall I read it, Simon, or shall you? No. Okay. She says, what message would you give to someone who wants to start to write a book, but doesn't know from where to start?
Goodness, I was in the same position as well. You have to have a story to tell. So you must have lived a little, and have something to say. I could never have written anything when I came out of university. Although I had experience and, it wasn't time for me. So I have a story to tell and then figure out a way to tell it. People send me emails all the time asking me for advice. And if you really need to tell that story, you will find a way. The internet gives people opportunities to learn how to write well. You just have to find your way. And also, I think it's very important to define the type of writer you want to be, and once you've done that, you're free. And I always tell people, dream big, because I never did. I really didn't. My biggest dream was just try and write as well as you can.
Thank you. So any other questions anyone want to ask? Or I can go. Yeah.
Question Q&A. We have one, which is, do you have any tips for males on how to multitask like you do?
Males? Is that even an acceptable word anymore? No, I'm just kidding. Multitask. I do multitask, but I concentrate on one thing at a time. And so that helps. So even if you're doing several things, you give a certain slot to a particular task. And mind you, I have been in a situation where I remember when I was writing part-time in New York, and I had a baby, and I was working in New York as an accountant. I remember some nights, 1 a.m. in the morning, when I woke up to feed her, I would also type. I'd be on my computer typing. I don't know how I did that. So I have done many things at the same time before.
Yes, I found when my children were very small that, if they went to sleep for 20 minutes, I'd be like, I've got 20 minutes. I've got to get as much done in those 20 minutes.
Yeah.
So I was weirdly more productive
Yes.
before I had
Yes.
children.
Yes.
Because I just took it, kind of focused.
Yes.
That.
Yes. It definitely made me more focused. When I started writing full time, it was different. I had so much luxury, and she was older by then. She was 3, so there were certain things she could walk on her own. That's my daughter. She's now 29. So it does make you more focused. I cannot believe that I was able to take care of a baby, work full time, do my writing workshops on the weekend, and still wake up when she threw up in the morning 2 or 3 times to I did it. So yeah. And I'm sure dads go through that as well when they're writing. And there's also that pressure to be a provider, as a dad. And I know that a few men who write have felt, because we live in patriarchal societies, that they failed in some way because they haven't been able to provide. And that's difficult.
Yes, I think from a writing point of view, you take on the work that comes because you've got to provide and you've got to bring.
Yes.
So you didn't really have any. You were talking about you have to think about the writer you want to be. My experience is that you don't really get much choice in that because you take the jobs that come your way.
Yeah.
So certainly
you made a choice. You still made a choice.
Yes, but what I was going to say was that when
you don't have many options. You don't have many options.
But the kind of path of your career is not up to you. The kind of writer you are is defined by just you try and do the best job you can, whatever comes up your way. But
absolutely, you're right. But I have worked with people. I'm thinking of a stage director. I'm not just talking about personal experience. I'm thinking of a stage director who I've worked with, Patrick Jude Otte, who's based in Jos, and who has stage plays through a lot of unrest. I remember speaking to him with bombs going off and wondering how he could do what he did and why he still stayed there in Jos with all the religious unrest and everything, and banditry and everything that was going on. So I'm not just speaking from my experience, but I do understand what you're saying, Simon. I'm not going to. I'm in no way downplaying that. Next semester I'm going to be teaching full time. Well, not full time, but teaching at a university. Next year, in fact, I'm going to be teaching at a university. So I'm trying to get work done now before I start that, because I want to pay attention to students.
Excellent.
I have another question, Simon. I don't know if there's any other.
I was just going to check, but I don't think there's anything in the chat Q&A.
Okay, so is that okay, Sefi, if I carry on then? Okay, this relates to your novel writing, and I know you adapted one of your plays for Netflix, am I right? It's the process I'm interested in, because I myself sort of wrote a drama series, it was adapted, and the process is entirely different to writing a novel. One of the key thing was the loss of control, whereas in novel writing you have proper control, whereas there you just become one person in a whole partnership, directors, actors, producers. What was it like for you? If you'd like to share that sort of experience.
Sure. And I talked to Simon about it as well. I wasn't involved in the film side of things, and I knew that I wouldn't be, because I'd read enough about screenplays and what happens to them. So I gave up on any sense of ownership or proprietorship, as Simon called it. It was fairly easy for me to give up and understand that it was somebody else's work. And I've experienced the same as a playwright working with different directors, where you might write a line and someone has their own idea of what that line should be. To be honest with you, as a playwright, I didn't appreciate it. I really didn't. But I knew what to expect with film. And as I told Simon earlier, I enjoyed the process thoroughly, writing with the director and producer. And then I let go. go. So, and it, by the way, it was a novel rather than a play.
No, I found with my drama, they had added 2 scenes here and there. And then I thought, they know what they're doing. They know what works. You know, that's what their job is as producers.
Sometimes I think sometimes it doesn't work that way. I have in the past pulled out of working with adapting a play for the screen because I didn't like the way, even though we had a discussion and our visions just didn't gel.
Yes. So. Excellent. Another question I have is difficulty in terms of writing. For example, with my 3rd novel, Revolt, I got stuck. I couldn't find a title. I just could not think of a title for such a long time. It became a nightmare. Have you had any sort of difficult moments in your writing life where something really wasn't going the way it was going?
I have. Everything Would Come. Such a mouthful. And that was my editor's idea. And afterwards, a day after, I said, no, it won't work. And by then it was too late, apparently, to change my mind. When I think back on it, a day shouldn't really, it's not enough time. But she decided, I'm glad she didn't go with the first title, which was even more awful. But I always felt that book should have either been titled Everything Good.
Yeah.
So Swallow also, people made jokes about that. But after my first 2, I found it easier to name my books. I also had problems with announcing titles too early. And that's why I haven't done so in this chat, because I announced a title too early and someone else took it.
Right.
Yeah. So that can happen when you talk too much on Facebook. Yeah.
And what about your characters? I mean, have there been any character that you fall in love with and you never want to let go of them and you live with them day and night?
I fell in love with all my characters. I didn't with one character in Everything Good, so the mother. And it showed. So from then on decided whether or not these characters are difficult people I would never speak to. I'm going to obsess about them at least. I don't know about falling in love, but I even dream about them. Which is, to me, then I know that it's happening. They're real, and my problem is that sometimes I can protect them from harm. And that comes naturally to me, I think, as a person. But also because I am an African writer, and I find that sometimes African characters have to go through so much just to please an audience. I remember a professor at Northwestern, where I was once a writer in residence, saying to me, "Oh, with an African," and he wasn't even Nigerian, which he said the most Nigerian thing. He said, "Oh, with an African character, their leg was cut." And I almost died laughing because I knew exactly what he meant by their leg must cut. Even the way he expressed himself was so Nigerian. So, and no, I don't want my African characters, their legs to be cut just to please an audience. They go through it enough in real life. So I can be protective about them. And yeah. And then I let go. And then I follow the rule of kill your darlings. Which I did with Deola in this book, didn't I? She had a one-night stand and she paid for it, didn't she, Simon?
Well, I think it all works out in the end. There's a lot of concern about what's going to happen, but the thing is we're rooting for her. That's the thing.
Hopefully she's not too off-putting. I had to take a risk with her not being always likable, you know. So may not seem like much to you. I don't do experimental writing, but I do try things that are different in every novel. And in this book, I tried not to care whether she was likable, because I felt what she needed was to be respected.
Yeah. Interesting. We don't have anything else in the chat or Q&A.
Katarzyna, do you have a question to ask?
I don't have a question. However, I would just like to say that it was a pleasure to meet you, Sefi, and I'm really sorry to hear that somebody stole the title from you. I mean, that's the reality of you know, there's so many people trying to do so much, and it's just the lack of creativity and taking responsibility and ownership, and you know, because after all, they don't really own that title.
No, you can't copyright the
idea.
title. You can't copyright it.
Yeah, it's your idea. You know it in your heart. So really sorry to hear that.
Oh, I mean, we have these things happen. After Swallow became a film, somebody used the title for a book. And she said she was paying tribute to me. So I had to let it go. I've let a lot of things go. So it's all right.
Very gracious of you.
Okay, so maybe I'll just announce a few events coming up. We've got a wonderful live event in Manchester. If you're somewhere in not too far away, it's really worth coming to Manchester on Saturday, 22nd of June for 6 o'clock to the Lowry. Excellent venue in Salford. We've got a musical evening with the Pakistani Qawwali group and the Nile Band. And you can see the tickets you can buy on Eventbrite as usual. We also have on the same day, earlier at 1 o'clock, Indonesian Culture and Heritage. Really exciting event. That's on Zoom. So if you are traveling, you could maybe even watch it on your phone. And then on Sunday, 23rd of June, we've got Sudanese culture and cuisine with Hind Gailey. And another exciting event is on Saturday, 29th of June at 2 o'clock. It's the Islamic calligraphy workshop online. So that's all from me. Happy Eid to all our Muslim friends who are starting their celebrations tomorrow. Qaisra?
Yeah, Eid Mubarak to everybody. Have a wonderful Eid, whether you're celebrating on a Monday or Sunday. And Sefi, that was marvelous. Really, so glad we found you. I know you don't work yourself, but we found you. We loved the session. Absolutely. You're an amazing author. You really are.
Thank you. You're very kind. May I just quickly thank my publisher, Michelle Mushabek of Interlinked Books, and also my wonderful copy editor and his team, by the way, which includes family, and my wonderful copy editor, Sue Tiley. She's based in England. I call her Sue the Great Tiley. Without her, my books would be nothing, because I'm a terrible typer, and also I always get English idioms wrong, so she corrects me. Thank you for having me.
No, but we're delighted to
Thank
have
you,
you.
Simon.
Honor to host you, Seth. We really have. And same for Simon, real honor to host Simon. And for people who can't remember the bio at the moment or joined later, Simon is a key figure for, oh, look at that, what we got here. Simon is a member of the Writers Guild of Great Britain and is the chair of books judging for the Writers Guild. And so it's a real honor. He's hosted our event last year and he's done it again. It's superb hosting as always. Thank you so much, Simon, for your time. And of course, for a session like this, you have to do a lot of reading, researching, getting questions ready. I appreciate all that. So wonderful.
Thanks, Simon.
Last but not least, all our attendees, some of our colleagues, friends, family members who are busy with Eid preparation, but they still dutifully have and now joined it. But now I'm sure they're going away saying, thank goodness we did join. What an amazing panel. And Katazina and Hajra in the background. Well done, you guys. So Assalamu alaikum again, everyone. Thank you, Simon.
Thank you very much, Simon. Lovely to meet you again. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you for having me.